March 2026, create your own meaning. Today I welcome back Mont-Megantic's Remi Boucher, photographer Jeremy Evans, and the Sierra Club's Dashiell Leeds. We have a lot to cover today, including some satellite news, another big slate of ecology, and how about we talk color? Specifically, what color streetlights would you prefer to live under? Be sure to stay with us until the very end today, as we had such a great conversation that I actually had to bump the ecology section of post-show. Don't worry, Remi and Dashiell stayed to walk you through it all. All this and much more coming to you today on Light Pollution News. Welcome to Light Pollution News. I'm Bill McGeaney. I'm the host of the show, and I'm very glad to have you with us today. If this is your first time, thank you for stopping in. We cover all of the interesting things affecting our nighttime environment. And if you weren't aware, Light Pollution News is a listener-supported podcast. That means we largely run off into generous donations by listeners like yourself. If you already support Light Pollution News, thank you. If you currently don't, but may be curious to see how you can help support the show, if you like what we do, if you like this podcast, you like what we have over on our website, you like our 2025 Ecology News Roundup, our whole ecology tab that we have over there, and just to be able to have all of this data at your fingertips on any given day, why not consider support the show? You can find that link on today's show notes on whatever podcast app you're listening to or for this show, or you can go over to our website and click on the support the show link on the website. As always, feel free to reach out to me via text link in the show notes. You can find us on any social media account and drop a line, or you can just use the good old-fashioned email. I mean, it works. It works very well. You can reach me at bill@lightpollutionnews.com. So I have a great set of guests with me today. We're just actually chatting about a little national park comparison between countries right before I recorded. But first up, who wasn't involved in that conversation, from California over at the Sierra Club Loma Prieta chapter, I'd like to welcome back Dashiell Leeds. And Dashiell works as a conservation coordinator and has the experience of putting together ordinances that work, including at Palo Alto, Los Altos, Cupertino, and Sunnyvale's Beaufort Park Special Plan. Dashiell, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me here.
You're out there, you're working hard to try and get, it took, you said, 2 years to get the Palo Alto ordinance through. Birds seem to be really important to this ordinance. Why was it birds? Why don't you tell me about that?
The science has shown that birds are extremely sensitive to artificial light at night. Birds tend to migrate at night and have been shown to be susceptible to the cumulative sky glow that cities produce. So that can alter or delay their migration routes. Really sharp spotlights or uplights can actually capture birds in them. So giant spotlights shining up into the sky, like giant spotlights, you can actually capture birds in the beam of light, and they'll fly around and get confused, and then they vocalize, which attracts more birds, and they can collide with each other and get exhausted. It's a really sad situation when that happens. So birds are, really sensitive to the disruptions that we humans produce in our environment, lighting included. And in cities like Cupertino, we actually got them to do a dual ordinance. So not only do they have lighting standards, but they've paired that with bird safe design standards to make sure that, building windows and other features are more visible to birds. We've seen that poorly managed lighting can actually increase the risk of birds colliding with buildings in the first place. So there's just kind of a natural marriage between bird safe design policy, between dark sky policy. They really fit nicely together. And, birds are kind of the canary in the coal mine for how the biosphere is doing in this case. We're seeing a major decline in bird populations. I think we've lost somewhere around 40% of our birds over the last 30 years. I may have gotten those figures switched. Maybe it's 30 in the last 40. But we're seeing huge bird population declines. Where I am on the West Coast, we live in the Pacific Flyway, which is a major bird migratory corridor. So lighting policy is really important there. Equally as well, on the east coast of the United States, their flyway has tons of bird migration. So yeah, they're very vulnerable and special beings, and I think deserve to be protected by these sorts of policies.
Yeah, my wife's a birder, so I've learned all about birds in my time being married, and I consider myself, I guess, a little bit of a birder nowadays too. And there is hope. Down in Austin, they had paired some responsible lighting with having a bird safe ordinance as well. I guess the building codes are slow to come around on that. I'm really not sure what the additional cost is for developers and builders involved in that. My thought is, when you're building a new building, you already are spending X amount of millions of dollars. I'm not really sure why you're just going to depreciate it out anyways. I'm not sure where that hang up gets in there, but is what it is, I guess.
I want to correct one of the stats that I gave. I just wanted to verify for the audience at home. So North America, we've lost 2.9 billion breeding birds, so 29% of total population since 1970. So that is the statistic on bird loss that I wanted to cite there.
Wasn't Philadelphia one of the first cities to do the lights out like in October? And I thought I read about that a long time ago.
2019. Yeah, Philadelphia implemented lights out because of some tall buildings downtown that the birds collected at. And it was, I want to say, upwards of 1,000 birds killed in one night. And it was a cloudy night. And some of these buildings, the Comcast building, for example, looks like a glow stick that goes straight up in the sky and glows. And it's super bright. So, it just like they collect from that disorientation.
Yeah, I remember referencing that in one of my talks back in 2019. I thought that was every city should get on board with that.
Yeah, and lights out ordinances have been generally positive. I know here we don't do it. We don't have an ordinance, or I guess it's a volunteer program. I should reframe that. Lights out volunteer programs have been generally positive, and they've had positive results. However, it is a volunteer program, and not every building complies with that. A lot of buildings refuse to turn off any kind of advertising lights that they have. So like we said last show, the advertising piece, I think, is the hardest part. Jeremy, since we're talking about you, I'd like to also point out that we have Jeremy Evans here. He's a professional photographer, filmmaker, amateur astronomer, Dark Sky International delegate. And last episode, you mentioned that you had seen real-time impact of light affecting animals.
I have a neighbor a distant neighbor down the street that keeps their lights on all the time because they think it keeps the bats away. They're not home, so it's a summer home, so they leave the lights on all the time to make it feel safe, and they think the bats won't roost on their house with the lights on. The neighbor closest to them was complaining about how it's messing up, it's trespassing their window, their lights. So when she found out I worked with Dark Sky International, I put together a little packet for her and actually even showed her how, the lights are attracting the bats, the lights are attracting the moths, the primary food source for the bats, all the other food sources and all the other night critters. And so we tried to educate this homeowner about how the lights are actually making the problem worse, not better. That was one, and you could see that. You could see it. You could see the moths hitting to the lights all the time. So these moths are just advertising to the bats, "Come get me." And then the other real life example is when I used to live in Southern California, I would grow citrus trees all the time. And one of my properties where I had citrus at had a light on a timer so the light was on all night long, and the fruit would come on different times of year and then fall off. I saw this artificial light disrupt the seasonal cycle of this orange tree. And the minute I moved that plant away from that light, it actually started giving fruit. But every time it was near that light, it never produced oranges. So,
oh wow,
so I see it with plants, and I've seen it with bats and moths, and of course you see it with sea turtles, with the migration, with the red light ordinances in the Gulf communities and stuff like that. So yeah, I've definitely seen a lot of that firsthand.
Yeah, well, we'll get into some of the ecology news in a little bit. I want to also welcome Remi Boucher back to the show. Remi is a scientific coordinator over at Mont-Megantic up there in southern Quebec. In 2015, you'll remember Remi was honored with the recipient of a Dark Sky Defender Award. He's done tremendous work in Quebec and has actually made the area a place that people want to move to, apparently, and which is great to hear. And he's helping to, continue to promote responsible practices in Canada and beyond. Remi, it's great to have you back with us.
Hey, glad to be here.
Well, Jeremy, you were talking about photography. I came across this one. I know you love being out there with the camera. There is a piece from Laughing Squid. It's essentially some guy's YouTube video, some Ian Laurel Astro. He attempted to film the Milky Way in as many locations as he could, from Bortle 9 to Bortle 1. For the record, I've tried here in my esteemed spectacular Bortle 8 and Bortle 9 sky with absolutely no success. And Laurel had no success as well. But once he got to 7, he was able to kind of tease out the Milky Way. Is there like a magical way here in Bortle 8, 9 world that I could actually piece through and see a Milky Way?
Authentically and organically, probably not. I wouldn't be surprised if there's an app or AI can do it for you now, but that wouldn't be real. You wouldn't be really seeing it. A long time ago, a company reached out to me that makes filters. I think it's called NISI filters. I've used them in the past in my career. And they make a light pollution filter. If they sent it to me, would I test it and tell them what I thought? And my first response was, well, first of all, I'm about reducing the problem, not putting the filter on. And yeah, obviously we care about light pollution, not putting the filter on and pretending it's not there. So I tested it. It didn't help with the Milky Way at all. I tried it because I used to live in the Bortle 8-9 as well. I had a lot of Los Angeles sky glow in my suburban. I had a lot of suburban sky glow. And all the filter did was just take away the brown, almost looked like environmental pollution, like haze and smoke. It kind of turned that nasty orange, brown sky glow you see on the horizon of a large city, and it just made it a pretty blue. That's all the filter really did. It didn't bring out any detail in the Milky Way. It didn't bring out any nebulas, didn't bring out any galaxies. It just changed the color. And they wanted me to do all these videos about it, and a YouTube thing and an Instagram post and a Facebook post. I'm like, that's too much social media for me. And so I said, I'll send the filter back, but I wasn't happy with it. So, but a lot of people say, I'll use a light pollution filter for astronomy. Like if you're using a telescope and you're focused on just a really narrow couple degree field of view in the sky, then filters can definitely help with that. But as far as a wide view of seeing the Milky Way in a Bortle 8-9, I'm sure someone out there has done it, but without certain software and technology, there's no way to bring that out, in my opinion.
Yeah, and the thing with those filters, those light pollution filters for like wide angle, they used to work, as you said, because they were cutting some of the warmer part of the light. Because
I forget the frequency or the color scale that it blocks.
Yeah, because it was more when public light were using high pressure sodium mostly, which is mostly yellow orange. So they could like take off this part, and so you would have less light pollution. But now that we are using broader spectrum with white LEDs, we're just polluting every color there is. So they work less and less now.
You're right. I did notice it worked better on sodium lighting than it did on LED lighting. Yeah.
Wasn't that amber sodium lighting designed specifically so it could be filtered out?
Not really. It's just because it was way more efficient. Because before that, it was mercury vapor that was used. Well before that, it was incandescent, and then mercury vapor. Then you had metal halide, which is more white, and sodium light. But sodium light was very, very efficient. And you have low pressure sodium and high pressure sodium. And low pressure sodium is much preferred by astronomers because it has a very, very narrow spectrum. So this can be easily filtered out. And in fact, you probably have seen those observatories that they shine like very bright lasers toward the sky. And this is to create artificial stars. And those lasers are orange because they are sodium lasers. And they are used to excite the sodium gas high in the atmosphere, around like 80 kilometers in the atmosphere. And so they kind of create this pocket of glowing gas, basically of glowing sodium gas. And so they can do that outside the field of view, but they could also like just by not looking at this particular color and not have any adverse effect on the observation. And they can have the benefit of doing this fake star and see how the atmosphere is moving, which we call adaptive optics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good little explanation of it. Now I fully understand. I remember back when adaptive optics were coming online, pretty genius. The whole concept is pretty amazing. Well, here's some we're talking about last episode. We're talking about some of the challenges for dark sky advocacy, but we actually have an article here from Janelle Johnson over at University of Wisconsin-Madison. She wrote an essay, "The Most Challenging Argument to Make, Feelings of Safety in Dark Sky Advocacy." And she interviewed 20 individuals, split out 12 as men and 8 were women, aged between 22 and 68. And she talked to them for about an hour. Johnson broke out the idea of safety into 2 parts. First, there's a rational issue of visibility. Pragmatism, I guess you say. You want to know where you walk. You want to make sure the pavement isn't, like here in Philadelphia, right? We have potholes, pavements don't go, they're not flat. Like they go all different directions. It would be nice to see that when you're walking. And then second, there's the emotional issue of risk, say the fear of the unknown, or the fear typically of unknown, which parlays into the fear of crime. Johnson proposed the following strategies, and I'm curious what you guys think of these strategies. First, never invalidate feelings. Work with emotions, not against them. Focus on glare issues. Remind a listener that you're trying to create better lighting, not take away their lighting. Start in areas with low crime or areas that will have a low impact first. And then also create powerful experiences to help convey the why. What do you guys think of that?
I really like these strategies. Going back to the science on this regarding lighting and public safety, the best I can say about this is that the science is inconclusive. We see no strong predictive evidence that lighting affects public safety one way or the other. So it appears to be that whenever you're looking at public safety from a scientific lens, that there's stronger variables at play than the lighting situation. We do know from the science of how light affects the human body that, as I said in the previous episode, that mismanaged blue light directly hitting your eyes creates glare that can reduce nighttime visibility. We know that's a problem for drivers on the road. It can be a problem for pedestrian visibility as well. So I think there's some strong evidence to suggest that light pollution, works, or dark sky techniques work with our understanding of biology to create safer nighttime visibility. That being said, back to these strategies here. I think it's really important to work with the community, figure out why are their emotions or why their perceptions are the way they are and what are their concerns. So for example, in Palo Alto, we had a really flexible curfew. Basically whenever someone was outside at night doing something, they could be assured that they will have lighting available to them. We don't want people out in the dark in areas where they should reasonably expect lighting or need lighting to not have it. The question in Palo Alto was, okay, well, how do we manage that lighting to make sure that, if lighting is on in these use cases, is it shielded? Does it have the correct color temperature? And, making sure that when the light isn't being used, that it has some sort of timer, dimmer, or sensor to make sure that it's not being unnecessarily used. So I really like that bullet point of reminding listeners that we're trying to create better lighting. And this is what dark sky ordinances actually do. If a dark sky ordinance is working properly, you'll maybe notice a lack of nuisance lighting, but you're not going to really notice a difference. You'll have the lighting when you need it. The lighting will be pleasant. You'll be able to see what you need to see. And dark sky ordinances are most active in areas and places where people aren't there, right? The whole goal is to have a reduction in overlighting when that lighting is unnecessary. So I think these bullet points are great. We should really work with the community, figure out what their concerns are, and design solutions that, work for people. And I think that is, I like the strategies that Johnson proposes here.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I totally agree with the strategies that are listed. We always say that reducing light pollution is about better lighting, not just turning off the lights. And we honestly repeat it all the time because people will easily stick with their first impression and they'll stop listening to you. So if their first impression is that you are there to turn off the light, you won't make any progress. So they need to understand that it's just about better lighting. And most people don't know a lot about lighting. We speak a little bit about that in the last episode, but often they will have feelings. So they might not know the technical aspect, but they will have the feelings of they'll have the feeling of glare on the road with incoming traffic, for example, or maybe the good feeling of a warm ambience. So you need to bridge the gap between their experience. So what is glare basically and how it can be better if you reduce it, and you will have better visibility, for example. And also too often, because I'm on the Dark Sky Advocates Slack channel, and sometimes what I see, and not just from there, but elsewhere, sometimes people are a little bit too confrontational in their approach. And I don't think they take the time to understand why someone is using a particular light, or maybe try to find the right arguments to help people understand how to use better lighting practices. So because for us, it's an evidence. I mean, we see bad lighting and say, oh, it's bad. We know all this, but people simply don't know. So I think it's important to listen to the people, try to understand where they come from, and try to get them where you want them to go. And maybe just one last point about the need to create strong experiences. I often like to remind this quote by Stephen Jay Gould. It speaks a lot, and it goes, "We cannot win this battle to save species and environment without forging an emotional bond between ourselves and nature as well, for we will not fight to save what we do not love." And so I think this applies to dark skies and the nighttime environment. Many people grew up without seeing the Milky Way, without spending time in nature under the night sky. So they don't have this feeling that maybe some of us, I guess most of us, have grown with, or at least experienced enough to want to save it. So yeah, I think this is important.
Great quote. Yeah.
Did you guys have powerful experiences that you guys did? Were there any experiences you used that helped convey the benefit of what you're trying to do?
We didn't actually do any like direct outings or, experience creation for the campaigns in Palo Alto, but a lot of public commenters have had experiences with Sierra Club outings and like go out into our natural areas. Like we can go, my local area, you can go up to the Santa Cruz Mountains and you'll get a much better view of the night sky. So a lot of the public commenters and people who were involved in the public process really centered their own personal experiences with nature, with the night sky as the reasons for showing up in the city council chamber for their advocacy. So we know that those experiences are really powerful.
Yeah, I also think these strategies are great, and I implement these strategies in my dark sky advocacy talks just because. And I also like to, as a visual person, I include visuals with that as well, because a lot of people, like, I'll show examples of glare and I'll show examples of a safe park that's lit properly. It's great I think it's a good idea to start with, low crime or low impact areas first, just to show that it can work. And like on the last episode, we don't want people to feel like the guy in Maine that wrote the article and just pretty much said no Christmas lights and you guys are all canceling Christmas and we're all bad people trying to have responsible lighting. That's definitely not the way to approach it, because as you guys all know, and with our dark sky advocacy, it's not about just eliminating all the lights. Yeah, if I had a magic wand, if I was king for a day, I would eliminate every light in the world because I'm that 1%. But it's more about responsible lighting and education, and not invalidating people's feelings, because you're not going to get through to them. Make them, and like you said with Bill's question to Dashiell, did people get to experience that first to help the cause? And with Remi's quote, if you want to save something, you got to get someone to fall in love with it first to get you to save it. And so people that have never seen the Milky Way aren't going to care about responsible lighting. No, they're good strategies. And I try to implement those in my programs because some of these people have never even seen the benefits of it.
Living in an area we do have crime. We live in it's a high crime city. It's not a safe city. But at the same time, hey, if you want that light, I hear you. You need to have that light. But all I'm asking is that it's properly shielded. Maybe you use a warmer color temperature on it. If it's not necessary, we don't need to keep the light flowing all night. Maybe use a motion sensor, something like that.
Or and if they're so stingy they don't even want to do any of that, at least make it a warmer light bulb, and that's that makes a huge difference right there. If they won't shield it, they won't put a timer on it. Can I come over and put a different bulb in?
I say get a giant mirror is what I always tell people to do. No.
There you go. Well, that'd be nice.
Well, this goes right into a dissertation thesis that came through Eindhoven University of Technology. This is an interesting one. So this is why I brought it up. Dissertation looked at how lighting affects pedestrian senses of safety and awareness via psychological measures of alertness, arousal, and anxiety. The study used field and lab settings for a series of experiments over a 3-year span between 2021 to 2024. And what's interesting about this is that it demonstrated how our perception of safety results from environmental factors like lighting and from internal psychological states, including arousal and anxiety. One of the main themes was that simply making the environment brighter and more uniform in lighting was not an optimal answer. Apparently, non-uniform lighting scored better for alertness, and non-uniform lighting actually didn't degrade safety perceptions. This alertness can create energetic arousal that increase feelings of safety. Conversely, when you have tense arousal that are associated with anxiety, that exhibits a lower tolerance for darkness. So I just want to kind of summarize what the author concluded here. So lighting patterns with modest sized dark patches didn't trigger the same fear of safety as, say, large dark patches. The author asserts that this is because the individual identifies the intentionality of a pattern, which leads to mental reassurance. Spotlight lighting patterns provide increased contrast and path clarity, despite not being uniformly lit. Jeremy, you're a photographer. I think you understand this one. Do you have people follow their eye through the photo? You have, if you're doing landscape, you want people's eyes to go a certain way, notice certain things as they're going over the image. And then lastly, participants felt that uniform lighting was actually boring and therefore reduced positive emotions, felt sterile. And I wonder if that boredom actually would create opportunity for crime and opportunity for malaise by that individual. So it's interesting. The whole dissertation is the data in there is pretty interesting. I guess it's probably not, boring uniformity is probably not that big of a shocker, right?
Well, from a visual standpoint, and this might not be a very good reference, but that's what separates a sitcom from a cinematic movie. Sitcoms are boring, flat, uniform lighting, and a cinematic movie has wonderful lighting that draws you into certain parts of the scene. I don't know. I don't know how that would affect perpetrator wanting to, commit a crime in a certain area that has uniform lighting versus something that might be more dramatic that draws you in. It was an interesting piece. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting to see like the psychological like study like this, because most of the lighting that we see is well, it's made to go with lighting standards of uniformity and light levels and things like that. But like most of the time, we don't need every single square foot of the ground to be lit all the time to see something. Like, for example, we can see someone or something crossing the road in a darker part between two light posts simply by contrast with the lit area. So the object, the animal or whatever is crossing the road might be dark, but you see it with the contrast. And also repetitive patterns of light can help you get a better sense of depth or distance. So I could certainly understand how seeing this perception of depth and distance can help you to maybe plan in your head if you are in a fight or flight situation and you need to like get a better sense of the environment, how this could help compared to uniformity.
Shielded down lighting gives you a better sense of the environment because you can see the environment in front of your feet versus if everything's uniform or washed out, you can't tell what way's up or down in that point with that kind of lighting.
What about intense downlighting, which is what you have in a lot of cities? You have highly intense downlighting in a lot of cities.
Yeah, if it's too intense, the pupil is going to contract and you won't see well in the darker space. So this is why you need to have like more like sober lighting and more balance, I think. So you can play with darkness if the lighting is not too bright. If you go into very, very high levels, then of course darkness looks scary and you don't see anything. It's just because you're using too much light.
Let's kick off some ecology news here. There's a story that came out of Denmark, and I know this kind of made the rounds. As per the Daily Galaxy, a Danish community near Copenhagen swapped out white streetlights with red lights on select roadways to protect native ecology. Now, it's important for me to point out because like I said, I know this went around some folks that I know that they're sharing this article. This conversion took place 4 years ago, back in 2022, and it was not the first place I've done this. In 2018, there's a town in Netherlands that implemented red lighting. The manufacturer of the lights, Philips, actually claims that there was no safety compromises. That includes 53 street lights and 69 pathway lights. Then in 2019, a 60-meter wide section of the A440 motorway over in the UK received red lighting. In both cases, there doesn't appear to be any documented safety issues. The red light came about in all three scenarios from a want of protecting bat species. And in Denmark's case, it was a 2017 study out of the Royal Society B Biological Sciences that helped spur that decision. So it's a step in the right direction. Remi, I mean, I feel like you've gone down this path before, or at least you're aware of some of the challenges or whatnot over there in out Mont-Megantic. How do you gauge such efforts? Is it practical for ecological areas to actually do something like this?
Yeah, I think, well, reading the numbers, we can see like they are like small example, but they are interesting examples. I think they are there to show like what can be done. So every single project like this, I think can help to convince other places that this can be done. Jeremy touched a little bit about that, but showing real projects before and after pictures, like is a very an effective way for people like to show that it can be done. So don't underestimate the power of before and after picture. I think people from Weight Watchers understand that a long time ago, but it does work. It's so easy to convince people with that. They just see a place that is well lit compared to a place that is badly lit, and you can explain why. So as for the use of red light, I think it can be great for places where the conservation of certain species, like bat, for example, might demand it. If it's more in an inhabited place, I think that social acceptability should be considered. Like I remember there was an interesting study, I think it was in one of the national parks in the US, where people supported red lighting if they were if the issue with wildlife was explained. If not, they were finding it a little bit weird. But when explaining the issues and how it can be better for the different species, then they were on board. In Mont-Megantic, we use red light mostly for astronomy reasons. So it's more around the buildings where we do observation at the Astrolab and the Popular Observatory. And from my experience, I find that visibility under red light is not that good. So it's okay to go around and see obstacles on the ground, but it's not very good to see faces. The blues and the greens, they appear very, very dark. They appear black, basically, and you have no color rendering. So for a general illumination and what we use here around Mont-Megantic and the communities around, most of the light that were installed in the last decade were PC amber LEDs. So those that have kind of a broader spectrum. And this is after using high pressure sodium that we've worked with for the first decade, I'd say, for the Mont-Megantic Dark Sky Reserve, but they became harder and harder to buy. And they are now in a way to get banned also. And sometimes you will find like direct amber, what people often call turtle ambers, which have a very, very narrow spectrum. But they have their own problems. Like, I mean, they are very good for wildlife, or at least better, but the efficacy is way lower. They are more sensitive to heat and things like that. So this is where you kind of have to find this balance between efficacy, good enough light, and something like that. And if you look here in Sherbrooke, because you thought maybe I was living like under the Milky Way, but in fact, I live in the largest city of the Dark Sky Reserve, like 80% of the population here. And here we see more 1800 Kelvin and 2200 Kelvin, which have much better color rendering index. They look a lot like HPS, like high pressure sodium. And they look so similar that people don't notice that we use like those kind of LEDs. Like they don't see if we change the light. So that's good if you're in fear of having some kind of backlash and things like that. But it's always a matter of social acceptability, but also reducing the impact and things like that. So there is some good about some kind of lighting zones. So depend on how you define them, but there's some truth to that.
I know after they do streetlight conversions, you'll hear the streets manager say about how much better it is than the old orange lighting. Mm-hmm. Right. There seems to be a real disdain, at least I don't know if it's on the public planning side, but a real disdain somewhere about those HPS, kind of like that orange lighting. Have you encountered that?
Not really. I think maybe because of all the education that was done, because we did change a lot. Like we removed a lot of white lights, mainly from metal halide at that time and mercury vapor, and put HPS, high pressure sodium, here in the area. And honestly, most of the street roads in Quebec were already lit with high pressure sodium. So we were just using better shielding and lower intensity. We just removed, it's a lot of like what is called like a barn lights or like security dusk to dawn lights that we're using, like those white lights, or maybe some commercial area. And for us, since we had high pressure sodium, we didn't want to go towards white light. So we already had all those gains. We changed thousands of lights here in Mont-Megantic, around Mont-Megantic. So we didn't want to have more blue light in our environments. And so we put this hard limit on 2200 Kelvin. But when you look at the light from those 2200 Kelvin's LEDs and the light from HPS, even though the color is similar, under this light, it's so much better under the LED because the spectrum is broader, like the color rendition is better. And it's honestly, it's kind of a goldish light, like it's quite beautiful. And this is what I'm thinking about when I speak about social acceptability. I mean, it's such a warm and welcoming light to be under. And I can understand people might not like the high pressure sodium because the spectrum is a little bit weird, and so everything kind of looks orange yellow. But under those LEDs, it is very, very nice to the eye.
And you mentioned before, well, we spoke about before about having some good examples, good experiences that people can have. I think having something like that, a lot of people don't realize how good these new LED lights are at color rendering. And they think of, when you get down into warmer temperatures, they think, oh no, it's going to be like an HPS. They think it's going to be exactly like that. I find that there's a lack of comparable resources out there to help that individual envision what their street would look like.
Yeah, sure. You had Scotland a few episodes ago, I think, and he sent me a very nice illustration. He took measurements of those like color charts that you have like for photography, and he shot it under HPS and 1800 Kelvin with a good CRI, good color rendering index, 2200 and going up. And you can see that with those like those newer LEDs, color rendering was very good. So it's not incandescent light, of course, which scores very highest on the color rendering index. Mm-hmm. But you do have so much of the advantages of modern LED lighting, but without less of the blue light. So
when LED lighting first came out, it was horrendous, but you're right. The CRI has gotten so much better now. I have a question for you. If I could ask Remi about with the Denmark, when I read about the Denmark red lighting, of course I was like, yeah, that would be awesome if I saw every community and city do that. But you're right. I don't think it might be more for communities like for bats or the Gulf communities for the sea turtles. Do you think that communities in general would it sounds like you don't think they would accept that red lighting so much? Because I personally like the red lighting, but you can't, like you said, the color rendering, like you can't read the text disappears on paper, and signs will be hard to read if everything's where you'd have to change everything else out to make text stand out. But you think the orange and amber is just a better way to do it as opposed to just making all the communities all red lights?
Yeah, I don't want to judge too much because I haven't been into the technical aspect of those. Maybe the red LEDs they are using, maybe they are kind of a broader spectrum, a little bit like of a deep amber or something like that. So it might be different from the red LEDs that I've seen before. But the fact is that your vision is less sensitive in the red part, just like it is not in the violet part. Even the blue part is not. It's not that sensitive. That's why they have to put this huge peak of blue light into the LEDs so that we can see some blue. So if you look under just like blue LED, you'll see that the vision is kind of weird. From what I think the social acceptability is probably lower. But I think if you are in special places like astronomy or maybe some conservation area, I think it probably can be used because there's not people living there all the time. I mean, the focus is more on conservation or the astronomy or whatever they are doing at that place. But for a city, I don't think it's probably realistic, but then I could be proven wrong. And you have some difference between countries. I was a lot surprised in France when they started to turn off the lights, like after 10, 11 p.m. or midnight, mainly because of the electricity price, which also rose with the war in Ukraine. But overall, the social acceptability of those measures is quite good in France. And I was very surprised because here in North America, I think that dimming is probably the best that we could hope, but I could be proven wrong. But yeah.
I think when they turn those lights back on now with retrofits, I'm not sure they're using good lights for the retrofits.
Yeah, I think they are mostly using 3000 Kelvin in most of the places.
Yeah. I mean, Dark Sky International used to recommend 2700. I think they've lowered it down to 2000 with retrofits. I think it's now 2000 Kelvin, if I'm not mistaken.
For a long time, before 2015, they didn't have anything about color, the CCT, the color temperature. And then they put 3000 Kelvin. And they are still at 3000 Kelvin officially for the Dark Sky certification lighting. But they do recommend 2200 and
20. It was 27. Now it's 22, I believe, right? 2200.
Yeah, I don't remember the 27 part if there was one, but yeah.
Some of my older literature has 20. Maybe. Some of the older postcards I used to hand out for responsible lighting would say 2700, and I had to update the numbers there.
Personally, I think at 27.
Speaking of, 2700 is great. I mean, if you don't want, and if I can give you an example of that, like Remi mentioned, if people could see an example of what your street lighting would look like after the retrofit or after changing the fixtures out, I did an experiment about 4 years ago where I actually put two fixtures on a stand and had an unshielded light and a shielded light, but I used a 2700 high CRI LED bulb. And I just demonstrate both lights on, then the dark skylight on, just seeing the ground, and then I demonstrate how the unshielded light washes out the sky. I show this in my programs. I also have it on my YouTube channel, which I don't monetize, so I'm not trying to get you to watch any videos on YouTube. But the video really shows how a 2700 high CRI LED light can work in a street lamp. If anyone wants to check it out, it's a really nice video that just shows the different lighting fixtures. And 2700 is great.
Yeah, shoot it over.
Yeah, Dark Sky International used it a few times. I made it and sent it to them a long time ago. So it's a good example. The Weight Watchers thing. Yeah, the before and after.
Yeah, that was a great analogy.
Yeah, good reference. Yeah, good analogy. Yeah.
So how about over in the world of satellites? It's not all quaint and peaceful for Starlink. Starlink tries to make it out to be a nice little world up there. And I don't know how this bodes for the future of low Earth orbit space operations. Starlink reportedly had 300,000 collision avoidance maneuvers last year. And apparently there was an apparent correction to what was reported last month, whereby Starlink claimed that they had lowered some of their orbits due to solar activity, due to a reduction in solar activity. But no, that actually was because they had some near misses with some Chinese satellites. None of that stuff matters for SpaceX, as they have received the approval to deploy 7,500 new satellites, expanding their orbital total to 15,000 LEO satellites. The goal at the moment is 30,000 Starlinks. And you may have heard that SpaceX is seeking approval for 1 million data center satellites. It's a bit early to go down that rabbit hole. I believe the consensus from many of the places I've read and some podcasts I listen to, that it's more of a money scheme to draw investment with the newly merged SpaceX and XAI, of which both were already Musk-owned companies. But Elon fans, don't worry. We can spread the soul-crushing news around to other groups as well. It's not just Elon. China recently applied for a bid to launch up to 200,000 satellites into space. These constellations, CTC-1 and CTC-2, will be the largest constellations to date should it proceed. Chinese already have 2 constellations in production, totaling 13,000 satellites. And then there's Jeff Bezos, who apparently not satisfied with just one constellation. Amazon is deploying the Leo constellation, formerly known as Project Kuiper, which has plans for 3,200 satellites, providing consumer internet speeds of up to 400 megabytes per second. And separately, Bezos' space company Blue Origin just announced TerraWave, which is targeting the enterprise and data center market with a much larger constellation of 5,200 satellites in low Earth orbit, plus another 128 in medium Earth orbit. TerraWave is aiming for speeds of up to 144 gigabytes per second. That's over 300 times faster than Starlink's typical speeds. And I did not find any details on the actual specifications, the sizing specifications of these satellites. Jeremy, the future is kind of dreadful. Like, is just the sky going away with the Buffalo? Are we just never going to be able to see a night again?
I honestly think it is. And I hate to be a doomsdayer here, but I really think it's going to be a huge difference in 5 to 10 years, because the original Starlinks were 5,000 satellites. And that wasn't enough, because with 5,000 satellites, you had to have a specific Starlink dish pointed a certain direction to have that internet not drop out. And currently there's 14,000 satellites orbiting the globe right now, Starlink and all the Iridium ones and all the communication ones. Now, when with Elon wanting to, what was it? How many is his 15,000?
Yeah, 15,000. That's what he's aiming for right now. Yep.
So he's aiming to double what we have in the night sky right now. And that's just Starlink. And that's so people's phones don't have to be pointed in a certain direction. That way, it's just the internet's just everywhere all the time now, which is really scary. And as an astronomer, I have old time lapses on YouTube. I used to do nighttime time lapses all the time, meteor showers, you name it. Just set the camera up, let it go all night long. I haven't done those since Starlink deployment, because most of my time lapses now are just full of Starlink zipping away. So I have great examples of what the sky used to look like, which is now like history footage, because it's just going to get worse and worse. And now with the telescope, half of my telescope images that I look through, a Starlink will streak through. That's kind of just random here and there. But with 15,000 in addition to the original 5,000 and Blue Origin, so people can shop even faster on Amazon. I can't imagine. I think I read that astronomers and scientists have predicted that when this all comes to our current state, when you look up at the night sky, 1 in every 6 or 7 points of light will be an artificial satellite, which is really scary when you see so many up there. So that's going to increase the overall brightness. If 1 in 7 stars you're seeing is a satellite, that's like creating more stars in general that are moving around all the time. And yeah, they say they're only visible at sunset, sunrise. There's been talk about reducing the reflectivity of them, so they're not so visible. They're about the size of an average truck. And if you reduce the reflectivity, they overheat. There's all these issues where you can't get this right Goldilocks zone of the satellite to not be visible, but to not overheat, but to not to crash into other higher Earth orbits. It's just a mess out there. It's a complete mess, and it freaks me out. I live in Bordeaux Two Skies. I'm building an observatory. I'm going to pour the cement this year, and then by the time I get it all done, I'm going to look up and like, what was the point? Because it's going to be all satellites. So it's definitely going to change things a lot. And my only silver lining is technology always changes and evolves, and maybe someday we don't need all those satellites, just like how we don't need those direct TV dishes anymore. So maybe this is just a transition into a newer technology and these satellites have a 5-year lifespan anyway. So hopefully someday technology will be better where we can have all these satellites out there and people can shop while they're backpacking if they want to, and get their stuff delivered to them at their campsite. So hopefully this is just a transitional phase into something better and more and better technology. So
Jeremy, that's my biggest fear, is being able to have connectivity in the backcountry. The reason I go to the backcountry is so I don't have to have emails, texts.
Exactly.
No one's bothering me. That's why I go there.
That's the best part. And I've had people want to go on backpacks with me, and their biggest fear is not being connected. Oh, I can't be away from my phone that long. So they're not the right person to go backpacking anyway. But yeah, my biggest fear is I thought originally that I would not live in a world where I could have Starlink on my T-Mobile phone, which I hear is a thing now, in the backcountry. But now people can make phone calls. You're going to be on the JM team. People are going to be FaceTiming their friends and TikToking about it. It's coming fast.
AST is making, they have much larger satellites. I believe they're size of a multi-bedroom apartment, I believe.
Oh, wow.
Less of them, much less of them. But yeah, I think even here, a good measure of that is here in a Bortle 8-9. If you see bright stuff moving and it's not a plane, I can't imagine how bright that is for you, Remi, for you, Jeremy. I just can't imagine how blinding that is at night out there.
Well, the International Space Station is very bright. That's almost as bright as Venus, depending on the angle of the glare from the sun. But that's going to be decommissioned in 2029. But I can't imagine all these other satellites being as bright as the ISS, because they're going to be much smaller. The ISS is like the size of a football field if you count the solar arrays. But if you add all these together, and I never even thought about the data centers. So I've always known about the communication side of Starlinks and all the other satellites, but data centers in the sky and
yeah, data centers I think are a little half baked at the moment. We had a story.
That's something I didn't see that one coming. Yeah,
we had a story a couple months back on data centers. NVIDIA and Google both trying to test the waters with that. It's kind of terrifying from an astronomer perspective, because these things are going to be much bigger. And in practicality, I think there's still a lot of questions on how you actually would have data in space, given all the complexities and all the challenges and all the risk you have in an area that isn't protected by Earth, isn't protected by our atmosphere.
Not to mention the environmental impact of all these satellites, all the fossil fuels it takes to launch all these satellites, 5-year lifespan, then they crash into Earth. And then you have the post satellite life carbon footprint.
You don't want satellites in your backyard? Come on, guys. What are we doing?
They're fun to watch burn up, but then again, so are meteors. So yeah.
Yeah, it's sad because, and you mentioned the International Space Station, but I've been doing astronomy with people for a long time. And what used to be a cool experience, like when seeing an iridium flare or pointing at the ISS and saying, well, there's astronauts over there, like wave them. And now it's just like annoying buzzing of hundreds or thousands of artificial stars in the sky. People take a picture with their phone and they think they saw a shooting star. Well, they think that they shot a shooting star and it's just another satellite. Yeah. And personally, I decided, like, probably for my own mental health, to let the issue of satellite light pollution to others, because I concentrate on things more closer to the ground on which I can make a real difference. And there are other important reasons to reduce light pollution. So even if I want to save the dark skies, but there's also a lot of benefits to reducing light pollution. And so it's not like the combat is lost. No?
Yeah, the thing is, people that live in a light polluted city, their saving grace is to go out to a dark sky park or a dark sky sanctuary. But if we have all these satellites, what's the benefit of going to these dark sky sanctuaries or dark sky parks? I mean, seeing a iridium flare, I used to point out iridium flares all the time to my backpack.
Yeah, it was cool.
Oh, in 8:30 in the west, you're going to see this really cool flare. That was neat because it was unique and they only happened every so often. But now it's going to be the Jetsons flying overhead all the time. It's just going to be absolutely bonkers. But in the ISS, it was fun to see. And that's because, it's like, hey, 17,500 miles an hour, say hi. And they'll be back in 90 minutes or whatever. And that's cool. But when you got millions and millions of satellites doing that, it's kind of takes away the novelty of it. I mean, the Hubble Space Telescope's fun to track because it's so faint, because it's higher than twice as higher than the space station. But these are low Earth orbit. It's going to be like living by an airport. It's really daunting. Yeah, very scary. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to react kind of like emotionally to what some listeners may be feeling hearing the discussion of satellites. And it's something that I encounter very frequently as an environmental advocate who reads national, international news, as you have these...
Who lives in 2025 and 2026 during this administration, right?
Exactly, yeah. It's like you can...
How are you sane?
Yeah, you get all of this news of these large... seemingly accelerating human projects that are degrading the environment and the biosphere around us. And sometimes it can feel so large and out of our control. It kind of like begs the existential question for us who care about the environment. Like, what do we do with our time, and how do we like keep ourselves sane and live our lives in a meaningful way? And it kind of goes back to like the questions posed by existential philosophers. Like, if you found out there was no ultimate meaning to life, what would you do with your life? And many philosophers answer that question with this, like, you create your own meaning. And I think as environmental advocates, we kind of have to create our own purpose and path in this world that is hurtling in the exact opposite direction that we'd like it to go in. And I really like Remi's answer of like focusing where he has influence and impact and having like that impact there. And I very much empathize with that as a local environmental advocate. Like, I focus in on the cities, the counties where I live. I read the local agendas. And I think we really need a population that has this organizing drive, this education drive, just like the skill set of working within these systems. Because the one sort of, I guess it's a positive and negative of these like giant mechanical movements of human societies, that they create instability for themselves. So as societies moving towards loss of the biosphere, loss of the night sky, it's also, these systems are creating their own instability. So there will be opportunity for change. We don't know when that's going to happen, how that's going to happen. But if opportunities do arise, we need an educated population. We need a motivated population, a population that understands how their local systems work and how to affect change within that. And perhaps within that framework, if, you know, those who have like the mindset of an environmentalist or an advocate, like, keep that fire lit within you, work where you find a local impact. It's okay that you can't change the whole world, but there may be opportunities that come about in your lifetime, maybe in your children's lifetime, where grand, massive scale change is possible. We just need to keep our fires lit and bide our time. I think we'll have an opportunity.
Dashiell, I'm going to sign you up for being a motivational speaker on this show.
Yeah. and speaking of what you can do, though, like, and not in the small community level, but there is an FCC comment period right now for all these satellites. And so there is a way to comment and make your voice heard about that. Yeah.
Just about to get there, Jeremy. Yep. Darkscape International has a link and a comment template for anyone who's interested in doing the Reflect Orbital approval and the SpaceX plan to launch 1 million satellites in a low Earth orbit for XAI. And you'll recall, listener, the Reflect Orbital plan is to launch satellites up to reflect light back down. Check out a few shows back. We had some really good stuff come up on that one. So it's definitely one you want to check out. I think it was back in January, December shows. I want to close out with this piece. And this, I always like when I find good art or literature stuff regarding our appreciation or our connection with night. And this comes specifically from the Sanctuary of St. John Bosco in Brasilia. And the facility is a church, and it looks like a flat square from above, but at ground level, it has over 80 arching columns, and it runs the full length of each side. It's a modernist design from Carlos Alberto Naves, built back in 1970. But what really drew my attention to this church was the stained glass. The glass itself is made up of over 2,200 square meters of colored glass arranged in 140,000 openings. And this glass casts down 12 different shades of blue into the interior with due intent to mimic a starry night sky. The glass, by the way, was designed by a Belgian named Hubert van Doorn. You can find that link over in the show notes. It's just another example of the creativity that gets impaired when we lose our second half of the day. This place is stunning. Did you guys check out that link, this church? It's amazing. Yeah.
It's like a Van Gogh. It kind of was.
I mean, I would definitely be going to church every week with that. I mean, you talk about inspirational. That's, to me, that embodies kind of, I guess, the emotion and aspiration that you were looking for.
One added benefit of the glass in that church is that it's actually bird safe as well. The way that glass, it's not very transparent or reflective, and there's small little breaks in the glass. It looks like every 2 inches by 4 inches, which is perfect for bird safe design. So just a wonderful example of building design that elevates the night sky and is also safe for birds.
Excellent. Well, I did not know that. Thank you, Dashiell, for adding that good expert commentary in there. Before I go today, I want to give my great slate of guests another thank you. You guys, it's been a pleasure to have you on. I want to give you guys a plug here. Remi, where can people learn more about the work you're doing?
Yeah, sure. Simply go to meganticdarksky.org for more practical information, not just about the dark sky reserve, but also just good lighting practices. So,
Jeremy, where can people find more about the photography or anything that's happening on your end?
My website has a upcoming events page with my dark sky programs and telescope tours and my advocacy talks. And I'm still very active with Dark Sky International. Also, I'll be reaching out to Dashiell here about, I'd like to copy that Palo Alto. I'd like to get all the Palo Alto plans because I live in between Bishop and Mammoth and I'm concerned about my area. So I'm also going to start working on some local ordinances and trying to make sure it stays dark where I'm at. So, but mostly my website for events and what I'm up to.
Great. And Dashiell, how can a listener learn more about what you're doing and what's going on at Sierra Club?
Absolutely. Yeah, wonderful. Jeremy, I'm looking forward to that conversation about dark sky standards. Folks can check out their local Sierra Club chapter by just going to the Sierra Club website. I'm in the Loma Prieta chapter, so if you're in Northern California, you just Google the Sierra Club Loma Prieta chapter. And just a quick shout out to folks who are interested in getting involved in light pollution or any advocacy issue. Read your local city council agendas and find folks in your community who, want to speak at city council meetings. It's a great place to start reading those agenda documents.
For you, listener at home, I just want to give one little note that I didn't get to my ecology articles in the main section of the show, so I'll be having them post-show here, so just stay with me. I'd like to thank my guests one more time. I'd also like to thank you at home. Thank you for supporting the show. Thank you for helping us get to where we are right now. Light Pollution News is a listener support show. Should you be interested in helping us cover our costs and stay afloat, please definitely check the support the show link over on our website, lightpollutionnews.com. So that wraps it up for this week. Special thanks to Emily Byers and Laura Taylor for your assistance on social media. And again, if you're interested in helping us, Bill at lightpollutionnews.com, just send a shout out. I'll listen and see what we can do. This is Bill McGinney signing off, reminding you to only shine the light where it's needed. Thank you once again. Okay, so we had some ecology articles that came through and a couple articles on moths. These are quite interesting articles. A study out of the Proceedings of the Royal Society B assessed how modern LED street lighting affects moth nighttime activity. The researchers at University of Exeter tested 843 wild-caught moths from 23 species over multiple nights in 2023 and 2024. They filmed each moth individually in outdoor chambers exposed to different LED types. The results are rather interesting. Standard white LEDs at 10 lux used to simulate street lighting reduced moth activity by 85% compared to natural darkness. Amber lighting, often promoted as wildlife friendly, didn't seem to fare much better. It suppressed activity by 57 to 73% at the same intensity. The team found no meaningful difference between broad spectrum LEDs and RGB combinations that look identical to humans. Lower light levels still cause problems. White LEDs at just 1 lux was significantly reduced activity, while some species were affected at even 0.1 lux, comparable to sky glow from distant cities.
about this paper in particular, first, I'm glad that they tested different kind of amber LEDs. Too often we see the term used a bit too broadly. And in this case, they did test the effect of PC amber LED, which have the broader spectrum. And they also use the more monochromatic, or what is often called turtle amber or narrow amber. So I'm glad that they did that. And then we see the difference. Basically, the broader the spectrum, the more impact that you have. So this is good. And I think it's good to remind us that there is simply no perfect color for wildlife. I mean, no light is the good amount of light for wildlife. So I think it's important to also to keep in mind that all the negative impacts of light pollution, so sky glow, the glare, the wildlife issues, but sleep, visibility, the electricity use. So I think it's important to keep all this when we are thinking about the solutions. And the best way, or maybe the best compromise, when it comes to color, is to use warmer lights. So the warmer you can go, the better. The narrower, the better. But you also need to work on shielding, on the intensity, and on timing. So this is why we have all those good lighting practices, principles.
The 5 principles, right? And it's the shielding, right? I feel like the shielding will make the biggest difference here.
Yeah, it does. I've seen similar things for insects because they can see the lights from very far and then they go towards the light. But yeah, it does seem to do a lot of, does have a big impact.
Here's the second article on moths out of Current Biology. Researchers argue that the most impactful time of light pollution's effect on wildlife is around twilight. They tested a migratory moth and a ground foraging spider under 10 to 15 lux lighting intended to simulate streetlights. Specifically, they mimicked environments under high-pressure sodium lights and LED lights. In natural darkness, both species showed peak activity in the first hour after sunset, when they normally forage, search for mates, or begin their migration. Moths being studied were a specific migratory moth that I'm not going to try and pronounce here. It's a Latin name. However, exposure to streetlights substantially reduced this early night activity, whereby moths lost their activity peak entirely and spiders showed a definitive decline. The team also found that artificial light reduced the degree of polarization in the sky. Such polarization acts as navigational cues for nocturnal arthropods. Under the study, moths lost this orientation information earlier than spiders, particularly under LEDs.
And it's a bit tricky. I mean, we try to balance like what we need as human and what wildlife or any species need. And us human, like we are active at those times, like near dusk or dawn. This is also where you have a higher accident rates, like near sunset, especially in the fall. So yeah, it's tricky to find the exact or the best solution to all that.
Yeah, you have a lot of wildlife out that time.
But about the shielded lightings, I still don't understand why manufacturers still make those awful wall packs and floodlights that produce so much glare. I mean, we were promised with LEDs that we would have like downlights and things like that, but even if with proper like full cutoff fixtures, they are often installed like with such very high angles, which totally defeats their purpose. And it just shows that more education on lighting is needed, like especially for electricians that typically like have no training about lighting. So yeah.
This shielding, Dashiell, I know this is something that came up in Palo Alto, whereby people were saying, well, this is great. We have this great ordinance, but the street lighting is questionable.
Yeah. So Palo Alto's ordinance does not directly address street lighting. So that is sort of like out of scope for the way that their ordinance is enforced and written. Public facilities, they say in the ordinance, will comply with the ordinance to the greatest extent practicable. So it functions like a voluntary guideline. Typically what we've seen when cities adopt municipal standards that apply to their residents is when they're doing their own renovations, they'll typically voluntarily adhere to the standards that they're also applying to their populations. So it's almost as good as a standard for the city, but not quite. But I think just like this whole conversation speaks to the importance of standards. Just like, Remi was describing how like you can take a fully shielded fixture, but then angle it so that you lose the benefits of the shielding. And it's really important to have that education up front. And I think the standards work symbiotically with the education because, I didn't mention this in the earlier parts of the episode, but like, these cities aren't sending out the cops to patrol the street to like proactively enforce lighting standards. It's all retroactive. So like people can make a complaint if there's nuisance lighting. And where this comes into play here is like, if a population is well educated, if it has good standards, as they build out their infrastructure, as they, install these fixtures, they could be installed correctly. It's so much more difficult to go back in time to like an existing fixture and modify that. It is possible in a lot of cases. Palo Alto has some actually great language around that, but like it just upfront it's so important to have the education and standards upfront because humans are constantly building and replacing their infrastructure.
I often say I work against entropy because this is what you see with lighting. You try to put some order, but then it just like the mess is coming back and you have to work like against entropy.
Yeah.
Well, there's a study out of the Journal of Marine Science and Engineering that assessed how artificial light at night, specifically levels as low as 1 lux, affected Pacific oysters over 29 days. The researchers monitored 64 oysters. They split the group into a control with dark nights and one with artificial lighting at night. The team tracked their valve opening behavior, shell growth, and gill bacteria communities. The results showed that oysters exposed to artificial light at night had 23% weaker daily rhythms, opened their valves 157 more times at night, and experienced 32% reduction in shell growth compared to control oysters. The bacterial communities in the gills also changed quite dramatically. The normal day-night difference showed bacterial diversity disappeared entirely under artificial light, and 13 specific bacterial types showed significantly altered abundances. The researchers found direct correlations between disrupted daily rhythms, stunted growth, and altered microbia suggesting that the oyster's internal clocks may regulate both growth and bacterial communities, with the key takeaway in the study being that even eyeless organisms seem to be affected by light pollution at very low intensities.
Yeah, but well, we know that circadian rhythm and light sensitivity goes like way back in the evolution of life, like well before the appearance of complex organism or the eyes. So it makes sense that species like oysters or coral like rely on different way to sense daylight. And I would also add, I think this is interesting when we realize that those organisms are sensitive to light, but just to understand also why it's blue light that affects our circadian rhythm, because too often people, I think about the warm light of sunrise and sunset, but when you realize that like light sensitivity originated like very early in the evolution, we are talking about species living underwater, and the blue light is the one that penetrates the deeper into water. So it really makes sense to be more sensitive to the bluer part of the spectrum. So
that makes a lot of sense. I didn't ever hear anyone put it quite that way, Remi. That's a really good way to put it. From the journal Land, a team assessed light pollution's impact on wildlife habitats in a 14 square kilometer urban forest near Leeds, Belgium. This area, I believe, is abutted by a university campus, hospital, and nature preserve. Researchers utilized satellite imagery capturing nighttime brightness and cross-referencing that against the maps of streetlights and the existing ecological network. Their results found that road lighting accounts for 68% of the illuminated surface. This creates continuous light barriers that fragmented wildlife corridors. Grassland habitats were most severely impacted, while forest corridors across a section of the study range were also fragmented by lights. The team noted that about 30% of vertebrates and over 60% of invertebrates are nocturnal, making this nighttime fragmentation particularly concerning for bats who actively avoid lit areas, even while fast-flying species suffer from reduced dark habitat. And there's one thing I didn't know until I actually read this article, and that faster-flying species of bats appear to forage near lights. And it was a slow-flying species that tended to avoid lighting altogether. I will note that despite utilizing lights for foraging, these bats still found less suitable breeding sites within the areas with the lights in place.
About like the dark infrastructures, but I think it's really like good to see more and more places which are starting to think about like the green and the blue infrastructures, but also the dark infrastructures. And I've seen it a lot in France in the last couple of years. But for example, there'll be an event just later this month in March in Montreal. And they want to talk more about the less known infrastructures like the dark, the white, the brown, which is the light pollution, the noise pollution, the soil biodiversity. So yeah, another good example of things in bigger cities that might bring awareness to those issues to maybe smaller communities also.
Mm-hmm. I like the framing of this study from the lens of wildlife mobility, which is, I think, sometimes underlooked. You know, humans, we have so many different ways of fragmenting wildlife mobility, a lot of our built infrastructure. But I think this study communicates a really important fact that the way we fragment mobility extends to how we manage lighting as well, which for me is also kind of a good side, because if we properly manage lighting, it's way easier than like unpaving an entire road. You know, we can create more space for wildlife and be able to bridge the gap between the already fragmented pockets of habitat that exist by managing lighting in those areas. So I think it's a good opportunity for any conservation advocates looking at natural spaces and how to protect them, is to look at the lighting nearby pockets of habitat and the lighting that exists between pockets of habitat. So just a very fascinating study in this regard.
Dashiell, I'm sure you're asked this, or I'm sure people ask this to you. Can't the species just adapt?
I think the rate at which human infrastructure is built far exceeds the pace at which our biology reacts to this phenomenon. Maybe in aggregate over time there you might see adaptation, but what we're really seeing, looking at like the aggregate science on this, is just species loss, habitat fragmentation, and just decline in species. So it looks like we're a little too, actually way too rapid in how we affect our biosphere as humans. And right now, life on Earth is unfortunately not able to keep up with that. Our biological mechanisms are too slow to adapt to what we're doing.
Well, let's finish it out with this last ecological piece. And this is an interesting one because there's a lot of conjecture about trees and plant life. And there's some studies out there that have been done. But this one I think is another good example of, maybe we're there, maybe we still have more work to do. This comes out of Nature Communications. Study tracked autumn leaf drop across 452 cities in Northern Hemisphere from 2001 to 2022, combining satellite observations with over 62,000 ground records from Europe and China. They assessed urban light pollution by way of satellite data. The team found that artificial light at night delays when urban trees lose their leaves in autumn. The delay was most pronounced at lower light intensities, specifically at a level above moonlight but below the brightness of a streetlight. And the delay also weakened or plateaued at brighter levels. So 2 mechanisms they surmise are at play. First, nighttime illumination appears to extend photosynthesis periods. And second, artificial light may affect somehow how the tree responds to temperature and precipitation. I will note that I also came across an interesting post from X, but this one from Sachin Panda 20 years ago. This day in January, his team identified how plants accurately match the circadian clock period of their external setting. It shows once they're able to do that, they're able to outperform other plants. The whole idea around circadian clocks and plants, I feel like we're coming about. We've had a handful of these studies. I would say like a few of them were really good, tight studies that I would sink my teeth into, and a couple others are more correlative. This is an interesting area. We don't think about how light affects plants.
The leaves at fall, I mean, I've seen it from like just anecdotal data. Like I've seen the trees with the streetlights very close, and you see how they still have their leaves. One example I really like to show people is how light affects soybeans, because soybeans normally go through the process to mature and they dry, and so they become brown and they are ready to be harvested. But the streetlights will keep them green, and you can see like those drone pictures where you really can see the outline of the light patterns. And I think they show 2 things. They show that it does affect light pollution can affect plants, but it also affects agriculture and the yields of those fields. So I think this is one way to maybe reach people to always in raising awareness about light pollution, but to show that it can have real consequences. And also all the things about invasive species, for example, and how it affects the worms in the ground, the different insects in the ground. And so people don't want to have those bugs in their grass, but if they put like lights in their garden, they're going to have those big, I don't know how you call them in English, but they're like disgusting and they're very big. It's like scarabs. But anyway, people
like cockroach.
Not the cockroach, but they're like flying big things. They're as big as nuts. But anyways, like if you put lights around your house, you're gonna have more of them. But yeah, so I think
they can just take them, right? They can.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Well, I appreciate you guys hanging out with me, going through the ecology stuff, and I appreciate you guys hanging out in overtime, essentially, because we went a half an hour over here. And thank you guys. Thank you for, Remi, the expert commentary, man. I really loved it. Dashiell, have to have both you guys back on sometime. Dashiell, your knowledge in trying to work with communities is second to none. So thank you guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bill, for having us. I mean, it's a great work. What you provided really helped to at least take some notes, and especially for me, like English is my second language, so it's a little bit more work. So it does allow me to not only be on the spot, and so it's great.
Yeah, really appreciated the sources you brought today, and yeah, Remi, it was great hearing your feedback on all of that. I really appreciate your commentary on that.
Thank you very much, Dashiell. I guess it's the many years of working on this. So this is I'm paid to work on light pollution, so I'm kind of lucky in this field.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. All right, thank you guys.
All right, guys, have a good one.